You know, it's not often we feel bad for big-time athletes, except when it comes to injuries, they have themselves a dilemma. Welcome into the Sporting News Studios. My name is Tom Vandervoort, and joining me now on the phone to examine that dilemma, David Steele, our national columnist. And David, you know, I guess what made you think about this was the announcement that A-Rod was going to have surgery that's going to take him a while to recover from. Just talk to me a little bit about your perspective on big-time athletes and big-time injuries.
Well, I was stunned when I heard the A-Rod news from Monday when they announced it at the winter meetings, because the lasting image, obviously, of the Yankees postseason, and really in a sense the whole postseason, just because he's that sort of a that visible and controversial a player, is how terrible he was. That he was totally helpless in both playoff series he was in. That he was getting pinch hit for all the time. He was getting benched. It was just embarrassing for him, and it was just a nightmarish way for him to end his season. Absolutely nobody outside of, I guess, the tightest circle of Yankee brass ever knew that there was anything wrong with him, much less something that would necessitate the surgery that would keep him out for half of last season. You would think that would garner a lot of sympathy for him, or a lot of people saying, well, I take back everything I said about him because he tried to play hurt. But that clearly was not the case, and nobody really thought about it at the time it was happening. And you have to figure that A-Rod and the Yankees made a point not to tell anybody. And it just sounds like such a dilemma that they had to go through, because he had an absolutely reasonable excuse to be awful, that he was in the middle of an injury that would hamper him all the way throughout the playoffs and into next season. And yet we never heard about it. And of course, when you think about that, and you think about both Alex Smith and Michael Vick, who lost their starting jobs because they have concussions and clearly are in no position to get them back now, it just reminded me of sort of the dilemma that all athletes have to go through when it comes to injuries.
Yeah, it's as old as Wally Pipp, I guess. You know, if you leave because of an injury, you might never show back up again. Is there a rule of thumb or a way guys can approach this so they're not stuck in this kind of darned if you do, darned if you don't position?
You know, it really doesn't seem as if there is any kind of rule, because it really does seem like a no-win situation either way. Because, I mean, even if you're somebody who has a pretty good reputation in the public, or amongst his own team, or amongst his fellow players, it really doesn't help you in the bottom line. One of the examples I used was Peyton Manning, who maybe has as impeccable a reputation in the NFL as anybody does. Everybody would have loved him to be one of those stories of a guy who plays his entire career with one team, who led him to a Super Bowl and led him to glory, and is an icon in the city and the state and in the league and the franchise. And he gets hurt, misses a year, and the Colts get rid of him immediately. He goes on and flourishes with another team, and that's the sort of story that has gone on throughout the history of sports. And who knows how, if Wally Pipp had decided, my head doesn't feel that bad, I'm going to stay. Maybe he's the one in the Hall of Fame right now, and nobody ever heard of Lou Gehrig. And you wonder, if you had to do it again, would you say anything? Would you go ahead and keep your place in the lineup? No one has ever come up with a good solution for this. Yeah,
it's such ingrained in the culture of sports, I guess, is how much pain do you play through? What about the team doctors in this whole equation? Clearly, they've got maybe a conflicting set of incentives too, hoping, that you get your marquee players and keep them on the field. But then again, you have to take care of those guys too.
Yeah, no one has ever seemed to solve that problem. I mean, teams have to have doctors. They need to have in-house personnel, and you would want players to have the option to get their outside, to get some outside opinions, or to get some options available to them. It never really seems to work out that way, and there's a long history of lawsuits and complaints in every sport about how these athletes felt like their best interests were not at heart. I mean, that's a basic argument that all sports unions have to deal with from over and over and over again. So it's really a hard thing to deal with. And now with the NFL making such an emphasis on safety, especially when it comes to head trauma, you have these two cases of these two prominent quarterbacks. Everyone knows who Michael Vick is, and Alex Smith was, an overtime away from going to the Super Bowl last year. You have those two players with concussions of all things, and there's really no window dressing or no polite way to put it. Their jobs were taken away from them because they told the teams they had concussions. If there was any way they could have hidden it, which is harder now than it was before, all the emphasis now, if there was any way they could have hidden it the way players have in the past, they might still be playing, and they might be playing to their own detriment, but they're thinking, well, do I risk my long-term health, or do I try to save?
Yeah, no easy answers there. Listen, man, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks very much for having me.